Hi, I'm Derek Ashong, and you are now in the stream. Today, 7 months into the Syrian uprising, the death toll has risen to more than 3,000. Will the country slip into civil war? And what is the role of the international community? Our digital producer, Malika Bilal, is here looking out for your live feedback. Also on the couch with us today is Syrian-American hip-hop artist Omar Effendem. Omar, as I said just before we got live on air, you were actually our very, very first guest when we were pre-piloting this show.
That's
Pilots no one ever saw, so it's great to have you in the house.
It's great to be back. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, tell us a little bit about what you're working on right now, because I know you just finished a new album.
Well, I just finished, I've been promoting my album, Syria Americana, which I released last summer on tour. So I've been touring. I was just in Australia last weekend, heading to Philly, New York, and North Carolina, and London actually next month. So really excited about that. And I'm also working on a new album with Sami Matar, who's the producer of #Jan25, which a lot of people who are tuning in might have heard. So
that's dope.
The entire album will be produced by him.
If they have it on, if they can take it, people can see on my screen. We've actually got the album there, Syrian Americana, and it's actually perfect to have you here because there are some complexities in what's happening in Syria, and we're looking forward to getting your perspective. So thanks for bringing the artist vision.
Thanks again for having me.
Absolutely. Now, as always, this show is all about you, our community. So if you've got a short story that you want to share, send it to us on Twitter at AJStream. You yourself might wind up right here in the stream.
The topic of today's feedback segment comes to us from a member of the stream's Facebook community. Takvira suggested we look into an Indonesian government crackdown on pro-independence activists in the rest of Papua province. Witnesses say Indonesian security forces stormed a rally of the 3rd Papuan People's Congress on Wednesday, firing tear gas and warning shots into a crowd of thousands of people. The raid caused a ripple effect across social media sites, with online activists outside of the region voicing their concern. Twitter user Pacific Justice tweets, "For all those who support Occupy Wall Street, a people's meeting in West Papua is under attack by the Indonesian military. Issues are the same." At least 100 people were reportedly arrested in the crackdown after what was believed to be an announcement by the group declaring independence for the province from Indonesia. Now, for decades, ethnic Papuans have demanded a referendum on self-determination for Papua's estimated 3.6 million population, and they have rejected the region's special autonomy status within Indonesia. But under Indonesian law, acts such as displaying the Morning Star flag of Papuan independence, which the Congress did Monday and which is on my screen here, are punishable by lengthy prison terms. Now, there was no official immediate comment from the Indonesian government about the incident, and the region is off limits to most foreign journalists. But if you're following the story, we want to hear from you. That's just one of the many stories you're following. Here are some other stories we're keeping an eye on.
As President Bashar al-Assad's government continues to use force against pro-democracy protesters, Syrians are divided over the need for foreign intervention. I want to show you a video from just this morning in Aleppo, Syria. Now, Wednesday, Syrian state TV showed thousands of pro-Assad supporters in the streets of Aleppo. They held banners supporting the government and chanted slogans against international involvement. Many feel such an intervention could lead to civil war because of the fragile balance of ethnic and religious communities within the country. Others feel Assad can only be defeated if world governments intervene to stop the unrest. Earlier this month, China and Russia vetoed a European-backed UN Security Council resolution that threatened sanctions against the Syrian government. Many in the country were outraged, with one father blaming the veto for the death of his 9-year-old son. I want to share with you footage from that particular video, and I have to warn you, it is somewhat graphic. We will try not to show you all of it, but this is worth seeing.
بس هات دفع الفيتو تبع الصين وتبع روسيا. هي الفيديو بدنا نتشكر ميدفيديف وبدنا نتشكر رئيس الصين. هذا اللي بدهم اياه.
Now joining us now via Skype is Obeyda Nahas, a member of the opposition Syrian National Council. Also with us is independent journalist and author Nir Rosen. He recently spent 2 months inside Syria documenting events on the ground. Welcome, gentlemen, both of you to the stream.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Obeyda, I'd like to begin with you. What sentiments do you hear on the ground about the need or interest that the Syrian people have for foreign intervention?
First of all, foreign intervention has been a demand by some people in Syria only, but not everyone. And the thing is, the opposition itself is not in favor of that. Actually, the opposition in general is against it. Now, the activists on the ground are very frustrated with the late response by international community, by political, political means are not there, they're not deployed yet. There's no enough support for people inside Syria. They are facing death every day. And as you can see, the videos are coming, streaming in from all parts of Syria of children being killed by snipers. This is not good. This is making people frustrated. And of course, you would expect that part of the society will talk about military intervention, given the fact that this is what happened in Libya and it succeeded at the end. Now, this is very dangerous when it comes to Syria because of the type of society we have. We have a very diverse society that we don't think can bear the consequences of military intervention.
Now, Nir, you are one of a few, very limited number, actually, of foreign journalists who've been able to access Syria and do reporting during these times of this uprising. Tell us a little bit about what you've heard on the ground and your feelings about the issue of intervention.
I think it's a very complex question because we can't talk about the Syrian people. It's a very divided country along many lines, but certainly along those who support and oppose the regime and those who are sitting on the fence, uncertain about an unknown future, those who might not like the regime but are afraid of possible alternatives which are unknown, and of course those who want the regime to go no matter what. Now, certainly, I agree with Obeyda, there is this divide between those on the outside and those on the inside. And what I found was that there was a growing realization. People were hoping that during Ramadan, opposition activists were hoping that during Ramadan, there would be some kind of decisive victory. And they realized that during Ramadan, this regime is much too strong and that they have not succeeded in really getting Damascus and Aleppo, the two biggest cities, on their side. And then Libya happened. Tripoli fell, thanks to NATO military assistance, largely. And Syrians on the ground began to realize that there's no way to get rid of the government and its very powerful security forces without an armed opposition, or certainly without armed intervention. They began to call for a no-fly zone, which doesn't make any sense because there's not really any flying going on by Syrian security forces. But I think that certainly on the ground, most of the opposition would support a foreign military intervention. And the external opposition is very insecure about this because it makes them vulnerable to accusations of treason and of cooperating with imperialism. And it's also a silly notion because there's no way, following the Iraq experience and the Afghanistan experience, that the West is going to intervene. There is a chance that Turkey will at some point intervene if we see a massive humanitarian disaster or large massacres or large refugee flight. I think the only country that could possibly intervene would be Turkey.
This is very interesting, and I'm actually going to take a pause because we want to get Obeyda back on Skype as well. But I want to bring this to our audience because I see there are a lot of comments from our community about the very topic.
Right, there are, and a lot of them are split. And so I guess on the note that Nir was just speaking about, I raised the question from this tweet from Murad Mirali, who says, intervention from the Western world is the last thing we Arabs need. Unity of all Arabs is one solution. The people matter most. So I wonder then, and I pose this question to Nir, if we haven't lost him.
Well, actually, let's wait until we bring Obeyda back as well.
Okay, well, this is then just a general thing that we can chat about here, and maybe Omar, if you want to, put in your thoughts on this. Do you think then that Syrians on the ground who are against intervention would be more amenable to the idea if it's from a Muslim nation or another Arab nation?
I mean, I don't think so. I think people who are against intervention, you know, and for the same reasons, you know. And I was talking to Derek earlier. I mean, there's very few examples you can really think of where a foreign military intervention has actually worked out, you know, in favor of the people. So, especially in modern history. And so I think that that's definitely the last thing on their minds, whether they are Muslim or not. But I think that the issue of whether there is influence from other countries is definitely something that people are discussing. Countries in the region such as Saudi Arabia, such as Iran. And so, you know, people do need to ask themselves, you know, when they're bringing up these issues about, you know, these foreign influences, how even-handed are they really being in terms of how they discuss it? You know, when they mention Saudi Arabia, do they mention Iran or vice versa? You know?
Yeah. Well, so this is interesting. And Obaida, I'd like to bring this back to you. Omar raises the point that there are proxy forces that have interest in the Syrian outcome, or the outcome of what's happening in Syria right now, that the Iranians may have certain interests, that the Saudis or others may have other interests. Do you feel that the outcome of this current conflict, this current disturbance, is going to be determined by the Syrian people themselves, or will it be something that is more heavily influenced by regional players?
Well, it is heavily influenced by regional players. There's no doubt about this. And as part of the Syrian National Council, I know the difficulties we are facing. This regime is integrated in the region. It's part of alliances that have been built over years, over decades maybe, alliances that were built within the region and international community. So it's about separating the region, the regime's interests from other powers' interests. And we believe that this, I mean, there are common interests, of course, between Syrians and other nations, but they don't necessarily have to be through this regime, because this regime's internal interests are against the Syrian people. And any neighboring country or you know, a friendly nation has to bear in mind that if it continues to have alliance with a dictatorship, it is going to pay a heavy price later. Now,
well, let me ask you a question on that front, Obaida, because we know that there actually have been defections by members of the Syrian military who are concerned with what the regime has been, some of the actions the regime has taken. Do you believe that these defections are potentially a precursor to a possible military coup?
Well, this is one possibility. Yes, a military coup in Syria is very possible now. The army is not in position to continue in a battle that it wasn't prepared for. The regime at the beginning used specific parts of the army that are loyal to the regime because of privileges that have been poured in for the last few decades. But now, once the regime had to go to the wider army, the army started witnessing defections, and the army is somehow divided. The 5th Division in the army did not comply totally with the regime when it tried to use it, and we are expecting this to happen in other areas. Now, also on high-ranking officers, there's a lot of pressure. This is going nowhere, and there's a moral pressure on army officers who are part of the society, that they can't continue to kill people in the country like this forever. And this actually reminds us of what happened at the late stage of the Iranian Shah rule back in 1979, when the army at the end decided that it can't continue like this.
So I want to get some of our audience involved again in the conversation, but before we do that, Nira, I'd like to bring this to you. Based on what Obaida is saying, it seems that the military could play a very crucial role, but I'm wondering, if you have such potentially large numbers of military defections, is it possible that this could devolve into a civil war?
Yeah, first, just to go back to what Omar said on Turkey, I found that on the ground, most opposition people I spoke to throughout the country actually liked the idea of a Turkish intervention as opposed to a Western intervention. But anyway, there have been defections from the military, and they have been conducting regular attacks on Syrian security forces and defending demonstrators, as they call it, really since June. It's been a very regular occurrence, but their numbers are small and their weapons are light. An AK-47, some RPGs, it's not enough to really make a big difference. We have a few thousand defections. I met actually with some of the leaders of these defecting military groups. They're not units, they're individuals who are defecting, and they don't have any of the heavy weaponry or armored vehicles. So they can do hit-and-run attacks, ambushes, kill security officers on the road, that kind of thing. But it's not enough to make a difference. We don't see large cracks developing yet in the security forces, especially in the army, which is more mixed than the security forces. I imagine with time, should this crisis continue and the sanctions continue and pressure and intelligence officers from Turkey or the CIA will begin to call Syrian generals and tempt them as they did in Iraq, we might start to see those fissures, but we don't see them yet. I do believe that there is a serious threat of civil war, and its reasons are numerous. There is a real sectarian climate in the region following the American invasion of Iraq and Sunni Shia civil war there, the execution of Saddam, the assassination of Hariri of Lebanon, a real intense campaign by Saudi-controlled media to demonize Shiites in the region, and it's also now demonizing Alawites. The 2008 conflict in Lebanon, we already had an environment where there was intense sectarian problems in the region, and things were being thought of through this prism of Sunni versus Shia. Bahrain, of course, was the last straw. And then Hezbollah's, the Shia resistance movement, they came out in support of the Syrian regime. So we have intense sectarian divisions already in the region. And the Syrian regime, its security forces are a majority Alawite. The opposition on the ground is almost entirely Sunni for a variety of reasons. They're the majority of the population. The regime has been very skillful in scaring Christians and Alawites and other minorities and convincing them that this is kind of a Sunni extremist opposition. The opposition has also failed to successfully reach out to Alawites and Christians and minorities on the ground. So we do have increasing sectarian divisions in Syria. And
well, you actually bring up the issue of some of the things going on with Hezbollah and Hezbollah's stance on it, and we're actually having some commentary online about Lebanon.
Exactly. Peter Burgess tweets, I'm reminded how long the civil war lasted in Lebanon. Some of the same factors are in play. So amid this threat of a civil war, we also then have people saying, well, on the ground, there's countless videos of Syrians calling for help and a no-fly zone. And Nir, you traveled throughout Syria for several weeks. And I wonder then if you can answer this question that's raised by Rama Kudemi, who says, an estimated 50,000 people were killed in Libya. Are the people in Syria willing to bear such costs of military intervention? Did you find that among the people that are calling for this?
We can't talk about the people of Syria. It's wrong to talk about them as a group because they are so diverse and they are so politically diverse and ethnically and sectarianly diverse. But within the opposition, certainly, there are people who, I would say most people on the ground feel like there's no going back. They've been on the street. They basically declared war against the regime. And if they feel like if they go back, they go back to their homes, then of course they'll be killed.
I actually want to draw Obeida back into this because I'm curious. We know that there has been an economic downturn in Syria, not because of the global economic crisis per se, but specifically as a result of the sanctions against the existing regime. What role do you feel the economic factors will play upon the protesters?
Can I just refer to one thing Nir said about the opposition not reaching out to the Alawite community? That's not totally true, to be honest. I mean, the opposition has reached out, and we have some Alawite friends in SNC, for example. That's not the case. The problem is the regime is playing on divides between different communities in Syria and trying to create a problem that didn't exist for at least 30 or 40 years before this regime retreated to sectarianism. Now, of course, once the regime starts to pour in stories, people have fears. But at the same time, we know Alawite activists who have been punished brutally by burning their homes and trying to imprison their families just for taking action against the regime. Some of them were outside the country. Going back to the economic factor, I think the economic factor is playing both ways nowadays. It's playing against the regime and the people at the same time. The people are trying to find means, and that's why we have people in exile are trying to help their families on the ground. At the same time, we're trying to minimize financial resources available to the regime, because unfortunately the regime has been using money in government reserves to pay the shabiha, the death squads.
But Obeida, what's your end game? I mean, how do you envision a change in regime happening?
The regime is already dismantling, and we believe that this dismantling of the regime is going to continue. The defections are growing wider, but this is not only in the army. We are looking forward to see some defections in other places, in other areas of government. And this is going to happen because the regime is working on this. And let's not forget that at the end of the core team of this regime is a small family. It's the Assad family. And we have only 3 people in this family that are on the top, and not everyone else is benefiting from the regime as these 3 are doing. It's the president, his brother, and his brother-in-law. But the family is getting some benefits, but everyone else is not necessarily getting the same. Now, once we come to a point where this regime is melting down, people will start to jump out of the ship.
Can I respond on the sanctions a bit myself?
Yeah, actually, Nir, I want to just get Omar in really quickly, then we'll come back to you. Go ahead, Omar.
Yeah, I was just curious, and this could be to both of you, how you envision, if this regime were to fall, how people would then be able to deal with, the 200,000 strong state security apparatus that you have there, and all these individuals who've pledged their loyalty and allegiance to this particular regime for so long. So it's not just this family per se, but there are all these other individuals who have a lot at stake as well.
Well, the opposition strategy, sorry, Nir, but the opposition strategy is actually to separate the regime from the state. And we have been doing this. We are still dealing with people within the state, within state institutions, and we consider them part of the national spectrum we're talking to. And we don't want to dismantle the state. We have learned the lessons of Iraq and Libya, and we understand that it's only the regime that has to go, but the state has to stay. In fact, the regime is playing now against the state existence. The real existence of the state is in danger because of the regime, and this is the message we are getting across to everyone.
Okay, Nir, go ahead.
Well, just quickly on the sanctions, I'm reminded of what happened to Yugoslavia, and I fear that just like Yugoslavia under sanctions became basically a mafia state, where all legitimate business activity was criminalized and mafias took over. I think we're likely to see something like this happen in Syria in the short term. Sanctions are definitely targeting the business community. The regime is more than just the Assad family. We have a very large, wealthy class of people who live in Damascus and Aleppo in particular, and they have not really turned against the regime. And indeed, some of them are even Sunni in Aleppo. The regime is kind of a marriage of an Alawite-dominated security force with a wealthy Sunni business class. And of course, the sanctions are hurting that business class, and we do see signs that this business class is fleeing. But I think that indeed the issue of addressing what will happen to the security forces, especially to the Alawites within those security forces, hasn't been answered. And this is why Alawites, basically every Alawite family has somebody in the security forces. They're very concerned. They're also concerned by some of the more extreme sectarian elements within the opposition, even if they're a fringe group, like a cleric called Sheikh Adnan al-Arur, who threatened supporters of the regime. So I think that we will likely see that the members of the security forces will fight to the death. They have a fear of extermination. It doesn't matter whether that's true or not. It's a very real fear among the Alawites who support the security forces that if we surrender, if we allow any reforms to happen, the Sunnis are just going to eat us up or push us into the sea. Well, this is a real fear.
It seems, Nir, that it's not just members of security forces that are still supporting the regime or that believe that there's strong support for the regime. I want to ask both of you to stay with us into the post show, but there's a very interesting comment that I would like to end with. Go ahead.
Right, Marwan on Twitter asks, Assad can end all the turmoil in Syria now by holding early elections, and I think he'd still win with at least 70% of the vote. And I think this kind of goes to the point you were making, Omar, that it's not just his family, there is support.
Okay, so I'm going to ask both of you, Nir and Obaida, thank you so much for being with us. I want to wait and ask you about this in the post show. What exactly happens if the support for the Assad regime is deeper than some would think? Omar, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks
Malika,
again.
wonderful job once again.
Thanks.
And thank you for joining us. We're going to continue this conversation at stream.aljazeera.com. You can jump right in using the hashtag AJStream on Twitter, or you can go to facebook.com/AJStream and leave your thoughts there. We're going to continue this convo. We will see you online. Hi, I'm Derek. Welcome back to the Post Show. We're going to continue our conversation about what's happening in Syria. I want to jump right in. Obaida, we just saw a point that was being raised by Marwan on Twitter saying that if the al-Assad had elections today, he might still win with 70% of the vote. Talk to us a little bit about the people who support the regime. Are there not some arguments that some feel that it might be better to find other ways of making change rather than deposing the regime?
Well, actually, I don't believe so. I mean, this was probably the case about 3 months ago. But let's not forget that what the regime has shown, the atrocities committed over the past 2 months have changed the national mood. Now, I can't say, because we don't have any figures, we don't have any measures of public opinion, but what we can say is this: you can't really hold free elections when you have a ruler that has been in power for 11 years unchallenged, and you still have a period of time that you will have to allow others to come in and compete, and this is not going to happen overnight. So it's actually impossible, almost impossible, to hold free elections under a ruler that haven't ruled the country in any sort of democratic way for the past 11 years. He can't turn into a Democrat overnight. That's the problem. Neil mentioned earlier that but the people on the ground know once they go back home, they are finished. And this happened back in 1982 after the crackdown succeeded in pushing the opposition out of the ring. Everyone who helped in any form was jailed or killed. So people know the dark fate they might face if this regime continues. It's very difficult. It's very complex. I can't say that it's an easy solution. There's going to be an easy solution to this, but I can say that this regime has dug a very, very deep grave, and it's very difficult not to see it falling in it.
Now, Nir, I'm showing on my screen right now footage of a protest that took place this morning in Aleppo, which Syrian State TV actually reported and said it was a demonstration apparently of tens of thousands of pro-regime supporters. So how would you respond to this same issue of whether or not there might be greater support for the regime than is oftentimes addressed?
Well, it's surely not 70%. There's no leader on earth who could ever get 70% in a free election. Obama didn't get more than 50. But I do believe that the country is very split. Certainly, at least half the country is opposed to the regime. And others, Alawites, Christians, some wealthy Sunni or middle-class Sunnis might still support the regime. I do think that the international media has failed to explain that this is not a situation where you have a dictator and the whole country is against him. This is a regime that does have a large base of support. And that needs to be explained because people are going to start wondering, why isn't this regime falling after a few months like everybody else? They have been skillful in showering cities like Aleppo with attention, for example. There is a sectarian element for why some people support the regime. There's a nationalist element. There's also an element of fear and of control. There is, of course, authoritarianism does help. There's also no alternative yet. There is no individual, there's not even an Ahmad Chalabi, terrible as he was, that the opposition can say, this is the guy who's going to replace Bashar al-Assad. So these things take a long time to develop. So a plausible alternative that people can feel comfortable with. So even if they are opposed to the regime, they'll feel like they have an option that doesn't mean chaos and civil war and Iraq and everything that they see, because there's Iraqi refugees.
Let's get Obaida's response to that. How are you, as opposition, going or planning to provide a viable alternative?
Well, the alternative so far has been plural, and I think SNC was a development that the regime itself viewed with some worries. I mean, the regime was very worried when SNC was announced, because it was betting that SNC is not going to be born. Nobody expected 80% of political opposition plus activists on the ground to come all under one umbrella. And that's why the Syrian National Council is somehow unique in unifying the opposition. Now, let's say this. I mean, I know that Bashar might still have some base of support, But most of the people who haven't turned against it, and it was mentioned earlier that there's the wealthy Sunni families, the business community. I don't think these people support the regime. They are afraid of the alternative. That's true. They are afraid of the collapse of the state. That's also true. But I think if the regime continues and their interests are undermined, they will somehow separate. And we are seeing this already. Some of these wealthy businessmen are either turning their back to the regime, some of them have left the country already, and they are not going to continue to employ people. Like in Aleppo, for example, some of the businessmen had, under the state pressure, to continue to employ people, although their businesses are not doing well, because the government didn't want to see people unemployed on the streets.
I think Obaida. Sorry. Go ahead.
On the issue of the opposition.
Okay. Actually, let's get Omar to make a final point.
Well, I just wanted to ask, because I'm looking at this footage of these pro-rallies, and you mentioned government pressure. And there's always, whenever I hear discussions about these pro-rallies, people saying that, you know, they were forced by the government. Many of them are government workers. You know, they're pre-planned. In your time there, Nir, what can you tell me about these pro-rallies and the real reasons why people had to attend them or attended them?
I think it's wishful thinking to say that they were forced to attend these rallies. You find in much of the country that a lot of people, they may not like the regime, but they make a distinction between the regime and the government and Bashar al-Assad.
Right.
And since the uprising has begun, we've seen this cult of personality build around Bashar al-Assad. So even people who are critical of the regime and its corruption and abuses will say Bashar is different, he's a reformer, he's a doctor, etc. I do believe that there is a very large base of support for the regime. Of course, one reason why you don't see large opposition demonstrations like that is because they're not allowed to have them.
Well, exactly,
so we don't.
Yeah.
But I do believe that the people who attend the pro-government, pro-regime demonstrations are doing so generally of their own free will. This is not Iraq under Saddam, for example.
No, I'm sorry, Neil, I have to intervene here because this is not absolutely true, to be honest. We know exactly how orders come to schools, universities, and different government institutions. Let's not forget that the government in Syria is the biggest employer of the people. It has at least 10% of the population are employed by the government companies, and these people all have orders. They have to go out on the streets. I know some of these people personally. I'm not saying that they are against the regime, but they're not pro the regime. I'm sure of that.
Thank you, both of you. That will have to be the last word on this today. Obaida and Nir, we really appreciate it.
Thanks.
This is quite complex. And I want to actually leave you with the final word on this tip, Omar, because you're standing astride both worlds, Syrian and American. What do you feel about what's happening?
You know, there's a lot of emotions involved. First and foremost, I say, you know, my heart goes out to, and my sincerest condolences go out to everybody who's lost loved ones in the uprisings. And I just wanted to bring up an interesting quote. This is actually from President Assad in the Wall Street Journal in an interview that he did back in January, where he said, "If you did not see the need for reform before what happened in Egypt and Tunisia, it is too late to do any reform. This is first. Second, if you do it just because of what is happening in Tunisia and Egypt, then it's going to be a reaction, not an action. And as long as what you are doing is a reaction, you are going to fail."
Wow. I think we will leave it there. There's a lot to think about, a lot to ponder on this, and we're definitely going to continue the conversation with our community online. Malika, I know there are a couple of stories that you had that you wanted to point us to before we go for today.
Exactly. Well, we're reaching out to our community on Reddit, which is the social aggregation website, and we're calling on people to go to the stories that I will mention here and vote up or down whether or not they want us to cover them and what their thoughts on them are. So the first story we are looking at is a short film that's making the rounds on social media sites, and it's called I Am Not Moving. And I'll play you a clip here. And basically this film charges Secretary of State Hillary Clinton and US President Barack Obama with hypocrisy. Let me just pull up the audio here.
Leaders need to respond to these aspirations and to help build that better future for all.
And basically it intersperses clips of US politicians speaking about the protests in the Middle East with footage that you will see really shortly of protesters occupying Wall Street getting arrested by New York police. So for more on that, you can, of course, visit us on Reddit. The other story that we're looking at is out of Chile. And this is a story that is also making a lot of chatter on social media sites. And basically, the government is giving 57,000 18-year-olds 1 month to sign up for the military. Now, military assignments are obligatory in Chile, but usually they have enough volunteers that they don't have to do this. But because of protests, student protests, such as this one on my screen here, that have gotten violent across Chile, they say that there's not enough people signing up. So that's...
So they're going to conscript them.
Exactly, basically. And our last story is out of Uganda.
No comment.
Our last story is out of Uganda, where the Foreign Ministry has welcomed the deployment of U.S. troops. These 100 U.S. advisors, actually they're called, are there to help fight the LRA, the Lord's Resistance Army. But the controversy is that people say the U.S. is there because of oil.
$900 billion.
Yeah,
something like that.
I doubt that the U.S. all of a sudden decided the LRA were bad guys. They've been bad guys for a very, very long time. Yeah. It's a complicated issue, though, because the LRA have, I mean, they talk about conscription. What Chile is talking about doing is one thing. The LRA literally kidnaps children and forces them into warfare. So we'll have to keep an eye on what's happening there. Thank you so much, Omar, for being with us today.
For having me, man.
It's been really great. You got to come back again.
I think I'll be here tomorrow.
Oh, perfect. We'll be here tomorrow. Who knew? This is going to be wonderful. Just kidding. Malika, great job as well. And thank you, our audience, for being with us. Remember, you can tweet us at AJStream. We'll see you online.